Troy Bratton might be first.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Troy Bratton. I'm an attorney from the City Attorney's Office, staffing this working group. So nice to see you all and happy to be here.
David Broadwell. I retired as an attorney 3 weeks ago, and I really mean it this time. I really am retired now. And this is how I answer the question, how are you enjoying your retirement? By going to things like this, as weird as that may seem. So anyway, glad to be here, and I'll have a few comments, I guess, in a moment on the agenda.
I think Michael Cummings is next.
Yes, I'm a retired professor from CU Denver. I used to teach Paul actually a long time ago, and he went on to great things. So I'm glad to be with you today.
So if I screw up, you know who to blame.
For sure.
Dina Dawson, who told us she's in an RV right now, which is pretty cool.
Hi, folks. Dina Dawson, the Director of Elections. Really happy to be here and just provide some subject matter expertise when we're talking about the administration of elections. So, hi, all.
Next, Dillard.
That'd be me. Hello, everybody. I'm Alton Dillard. I'm Communications Manager for the Office of the Clerk and Recorder. A little context to my role in this. I'm one of the people on the staff who has a lot of interface with some of the processes that we're talking about. I liaise with the Department of Finance when it comes to getting their fiscal analysis compiled and over to our layout person. My team also plays a role in the layout of the municipal blue book, our little version of that, including we're the ones responsible for if a question comes in above 500 words as far as the pro or con statements, working on compiling that. Then we also work to make sure that we get everything translated and things like that. So I'll just be lending an occasional expertise myself. Nice meeting everybody.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Emerson.
Hi, thank you, Paul, for the invitation to be here. I'm Bianca Emerson, and I'm with Colorado Black Women for Political Action, and we're really happy to lend our voice to this process. Thank you.
Right.
Hi, I think I'm next. Kevin Flynn. I am the City Council representative for Southwest Denver's District 2.
Councilman, is that the highest point in Denver?
Home of the highest natural point in the city. There are some man-made points that are a little higher, but yes.
That's his tagline, by the way. EFG.
Kathy Guile. I'm Councilwoman Black's senior aide, aiding her in this work.
Right. Ms. Goldman and then Mr. Gruskin.
I'm Karen Goldman. I am the retired city clerk from Lakewood and the retired deputy city clerk from Aurora. But even though I've retired, I maintain contact with the municipal clerks. I currently train municipal clerks throughout the state on elections administration. I also manage the program called the Municipal Clerk Advisory Program, which is a collaborative effort among the Clerks Association, CML, and CIRSA. And David Broadwell and I have had many a conversation over the years regarding elections.
All right. Mr. Gruskin.
Hi, my name is Mark Gruskin. I'm an attorney. I focus on election law. My first election law matter, I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was, but I can tell you that it was the first time I met David Broadwell, and neither one of us had a gray hair. I have helped various cities as special counsel on both campaign finance and ballot issue issues, including the cities of Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, and Lakewood. And I'm happy to be here.
Audrey.
Right, Audrey Klein.
I'm doing letters and numbers in my head right now. Hi, everyone. Audrey Klein. I am the brand new Director of Public Affairs for the Clerk and Recorder's Office. I will be also staffing this committee. And as I get settled into the new job, I will probably be the primary contact for you all. So I will make sure you have that information as soon as we can. Thanks for being here. Really excited.
Honorable O'Malley.
Stephanie.
Madam Clerk.
Person.
I think she may have froze. No one can hold that kind of pose like that. No.
She's definitely frozen.
We'll come back to her if once she comes back on. Next up, that would be
Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks so much, Amanda.
Can you hear me?
Oh, now we
yeah.
can. Come on in, Stephanie. You're all good.
Right.
Okay, yeah, the thing is spotty for me. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, I'm Stephanie O'Malley. I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Government.
I think we're having connectivity issues. Clerk O'Malley. Can you hear? Okay, I think we see you now. Do you want to go
Can you
again?
hear me?
Yeah.
Anyway, I was saying, I'm a former Denver County Clerk and Recorder, like 2007, when our city really experienced a mess in our clerk's office, and got in there and rolled up our sleeves and got it back into a state of operability that was acceptable to the public. And I am happy to be here. Thank you.
The change agent for us in the clerk's office. I know we were joined by Deputy Clerk and Recorder Vicky Ortega. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. Vicky Ortega, Deputy Clerk and Recorder. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to see so many friends.
Right. Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks so much, Amanda Sawyer, Councilwoman for District 5, which is East Central Denver. Really appreciate being on this committee. I have experience actually from the writing portion of this process because I wrote the council approval for mayoral appointees legislation that was voted on by the voters in November of 2020 and took that all the way through the process from beginning to end. And Councilwoman Black and I have had a lot of conversations about what could potentially be improved. So looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Ms. Tierney.
Hi, everyone. Martha Tierney. I am an election lawyer and have worked on both all kinds of election and ballot measure matters for many, many years. I think I can remember David Broadwell when he didn't have gray hair too. And happy to be here, happy to try to tackle this project and hope we can come up with a better solution on the other end.
And I apologize, I actually messed up my T's and S's. Sky and Cassie.
Cassie's before me alphabetically, so I'll let her go.
Oh, hello. I'm Cassie. I'm a communications professional for the city or the Clerk and Recorder's Office. And yeah, I'm just kind of standing by and providing some tech support today.
Hi, I'm Sky Stewart. I'm a Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Hancock. I handle all of our legislative and policy work on behalf of the mayor's office and work closely with council members and other members of the administration as we evaluate ballot measures along the way. So a great deal of experience on the city process side. In my previous life, I did work on campaign ballot measures, actually with Mark years and years ago. So have experience on the outside of the building looking in as well.
Awesome. Now, I know that Councilwoman Black, I know we have a presentation, staff, if you want to put that presentation up. So really, really quick, I know Councilman Black kind of ran through the beginning, the purpose. we want to be able to convene these, the committee and the members. If you remember correctly, those of you who watched the first season of election policy online, we had a charter review committee. Those of you who are now haven't been paying attention, but those of you who haven't been paying attention, the municipal elections have moved from May to the first week of May to the first week of April. And that's because we did a whole analysis on the review of the model, solving for a problem that we had in terms of timing and modernizing our elections. This last time around, we had 9 initiatives, 9 ballot measures. And so having that many on our ballot and being able to see the different timelines and just what it caused with staff, it exacerbated a lot of the problems that Councilwoman Black had talked about. So what we want to be able to do is take it down to the studs. We encountered a lot of different issues, a lot of areas where we can use some increased accountability, some increased transparency, and then also, looking at access. Denver, the last time we really looked at these rules and these laws, I think the Broncos still were playing at Mile High Stadium. So, and not, well, they are still playing at Mile High Stadium. What am I talking about? The Rockies are playing at Mile High Stadium, perhaps. Anyway, they need to be updated because Denver is a different city. The population has grown. We now have surpassed 500,000, over 500,000 registered voters for the first time in our history. And yeah, it is something that we want to continue. This committee is going to examine the process, identify challenges, look at best practices, including the state level, consult with the experts that you see here, engage with the community members and the public to explore these opportunities for improvement and ensuring that we continue to have a fair and open process. This is the team that you see with elections in our office is the best in the country when it comes to elections. So we want to make sure that these decisions are in the public. That's why this is a public meeting. With that, I think we have a presentation by Mr. Broadwell. Councilwoman, are we on track for that one?
Yeah, let me just do a few housekeeping items. If you have something to say, can you raise your hand and I will call on you? There's enough of us that we don't want to be talking over each other, and the clerk's going to do a lot of the presenting today, but I'll kind of call on you as you raise your hands. And with that, oh, go ahead.
Councilwoman, we have one panelist that is not on the actual panel. Well, she's actually on the panel on the public side of Zoom. She got on the wrong side of the link, but that's Jenna Ozels. And Jenna Ozels is also on the committee as well. It's one of those things we'll tinker with and we'll get right. If she can jump on be made a panelist, we'll do that as soon as possible. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't skip her.
Okay, great. Jenna, wherever you are, welcome. We hope to see you on the panel. And David, take it away.
Thank you, Paul and Kendra, both. Thank you. I think I was invited to do this to give a little history and to contextualize some of what we're going to be talking about here today. I had the pleasure of working for Denver for many years to work on a lot of charter reform issues, including some initiative and referendum issues. Some of this relates directly to the agenda items that are shown on today's agenda and we're going to be talking about. So a little background just on a few issues through the years. Also, let me just say, I'm looking forward to being able to have a personal opinion about things as a citizen member of this body, because I had to subordinate my opinion for years serving city council, but now I get to speak freely. So it's going to be a real interesting experience. So kind of going way back, and I'm going to shout out to Troy Bratton on this first item. 2002 was when Denver became the first city in the state to have a review and comment hearing at the beginning of the initiative process. This was a concoction of yours truly and John Bennett, the former council staff director, to try to improve the quality of initiated measures by having a colloquy between city staff members and proponents to work through the kinks in their measure in terms of formatting and content. And we weren't afraid either through the years to comment on the possible legal infirmities, or whether it's truly legislative in terms of what they're proposing to initiate. We would engage on those things all through the years. And I enjoyed that process. But one of the things I'll say is that I haven't counted, but there have been more initiatives in the last 4 years than there were in the preceding 16 years. Cumulatively, we've entered a new phase in Denver history, and I don't see any turning back. I think it's going to continue at a very high volume. But ever since I retired the first time, I've been amazed at my successors, the volume of these they've had to handle in terms of scheduling, review, and comment hearings, making them a quality kind of interaction in terms of some of the objectives of that process before passing it on to the clerk's office. So I look forward to talking about how that process is working in the current times and how it can be improved. So that's one example of something we did in the early 2000s. Flash forward to 2008, and another thing that happened in that time period. In a moment, I'm going to talk about Denver quirks and anomalies in terms of things that Denver does different from everybody. And 2008, we added a quirk. We decided to do something different from everybody else in Colorado. And that's when council told me to draft a charter amendment that would take council out of the initiative process. Up until 2008, Denver used to work like everybody else in the state. If somebody's got an initiative, the petition stops first at the governing body, and they can decide whether to adopt it or not, avoid the need for an election just by directly adopting the measure. But for various reasons in 2007, 2008, council wanted out of the process. We had just switched to an elected clerk and recorder, a professional election director in the clerk's office, let them handle it. Council didn't want to be involved with, how shall I say, some less than perfect initiatives that were coming forward, even to just ministerially refer it on to the voters. They didn't want to be in the loop, but they created this anomaly. Everywhere else in the state, councils are okay with receiving it and then passing it on. But that's one way that Denver's unusual. And I'm going to come back to some other quirks here in just a minute. I kind of had to relearn municipal law when I came to work for Denver, because Denver's different in lots of different ways. And we'll touch on a couple of those in a minute. But so some real substantive things happened a little bit after my time in 2018. And I want to, in terms of a whole slate of reforms that happened at that point, which were truly important. And this was when we switched to trying to do something in Denver like the state blue book in terms of a more comprehensive mail out to voters with objective information to guide their choices. Previously, we sent out the Tabor information. We told that people what else was going to be on the ballot, but that was a real turning point in Denver initiative and referendum history in terms of trying to emulate the state blue book with something else at the local level. But probably two other things, but the most critical thing that happened during the 2018 period was changing the way initiative signatures are calculated in Denver for purposes of making the ballot. From time immemorial, 5% of the votes cast for mayor was the petition signature requirement, and we switched to a flat 2% of active registered electors in terms of how that was drafted. Now, that's still a very low signature requirement, and I'll come back to that in just a second, as compared to everybody else in the world. But at least it stabilized the signature requirement from year to year, from quadrennial period to quadrennial period. Up until 2018, the amount of signatures required could vary widely from 4-year period to 4-year period, because sometimes the mayor's office was hotly contested, high turnout. Sometimes it was a non-event because there was no credible opposition to the mayor. So it varied very widely through the years. But there were other great changes that happened during those 2018 reforms, and I salute those who were involved in those changes at that time. But I see from the list on the agenda that there's more work and discussion to be had in terms of how that information comes together that gets sent out to the voters. Now, let me quickly backtrack, and I'll be quick because I know we got a lot to talk about. In terms of those quirks and anomalies that are a part of the scene in Denver that in my view are different from other municipalities, certainly in Colorado. One, here's a fun fact. It's been not until since 1998 that there has been an initiated charter amendment on the Denver ballot. Now, at the state level, as you guys know, there's a mix of initiated statutes and constitutional amendments all the time at the state level. Even with Raise the Bar, there's still a lot of initiated charter amendments at the state level. Other cities and towns see this all the time, a mix of initiated ordinance, initiated charter amendments. Why do they opt for charter amendments? Because it truly binds the council and the mayor in a way that an initiated ordinance doesn't. The charter change really is locked in a way that an ordinance isn't. So this is common, but it doesn't happen in Denver, and it hasn't happened since 1998. By the way, Kevin, you may remember this. It was a Denver residency change. It was the 5-county area versus city and county of Denver, initiated by with support of the PPA. That's the last one that actually made the ballot. There have been some attempts since then, but we just don't see initiated charter amendments. Bringing me to my second point that I referred to earlier, I think it's largely because the signature requirement for ordinances is so low. To do an initiated charter amendment, you need at least 25,000 signatures. For an ordinance, it's only about 9,000 signatures. And people just tend to opt for the path of least resistance in terms of anything that they may want to see adopted into law in Denver. And there may be other reasons, but I think that's the biggest because of the uniquely low signature requirement in Denver. Let me talk about that for just a second. I do credit everybody in 2018 for at least stabilizing it from year to year, but there was a conversation at the time about whether to look at the percentage and analyze the percentage differently. But the choice was made not to do that and to go with just stabilizing but not increasing. The norm in Colorado, just so you know, is 5%. 5% of registered electors, Denver does 2%. 5% is reflected in state statute, and it's in most of the home rule charters around the state. That's the most common number you see. Now, strangely enough, the Colorado Constitution says signatures for initiatives can be as much as 15%. The people who originally adopted the initiative amendment to the Constitution in 1912 said it could be up to 15, but like I said, it's kind of 5% is the norm. In Denver, it's only 2%. A couple of other things unrelated to those previous points. Other Denver quirks. Denver is the only place I know of in Colorado where the proponents write their own ballot title. Everywhere else, the ballot title is either written by a title board, written by the clerk, or written by the governing body, including, as you all know, at the state level, it's written by a title board. And I think this is something we're probably going to discuss. We uniquely allow the proponents right out of the chute to write their own title. Now, the clerk reviews it based upon criteria. It's got to be fair, it's got to be accurate, it can't be manipulative or contain catchphrases and so forth. But I think proponents in Denver enjoy a unique advantage by getting to have the first shot at writing the ballot question they want, only to be reviewed by city officials, not written by city officials. And Denver is very unique in this respect. This is a topic that's near and dear to me because I firmly believe that voters who may not see or know anything else about what's on the ballot, they see the ballot question. For many people, the ballot question may be their only frame of reference. So I think from a good government perspective, we need systems that get it right and that are fair, plain English as possible, and I'm a big fan of having that discussion if this group goes in that direction. And then finally, something that came up, I know Alton was quoted about this one. We haven't had referendums in Denver in a long time. Alton, I think you were quoted, you couldn't find the last one, and I don't know the last one. I know that when the state had one last year, it was the first one since 1932, but it truly has been rare in Denver. But one of the things that got smoked out this last election is Denver has some quirky referendum aspects to its law. Most places, the referendum process means the law doesn't go into effect until the voters have a chance to vote on it. In Denver, it does go into effect, only to be repealed via the referendum. Once again, I don't know of anybody else in the state that does it that way. I know why Denver switched to that system like in 1980, and we can talk about that later, but Denver's system creates this yes means no, no means yes when people are voting on the ballot question. And I think a lot of confusion in Denver, there's other details I won't go into at this point, but let's just suffice it to say, Denver's laws on referendum are unique in Colorado in terms of the way it's structured. And I'd be happy to talk more about that in future months and future meetings in terms of some of the history on that. So that was quick. I hope I didn't overdo my time. I love to talk history almost as much as Kevin Flynn does, And Kevin, I see your hands up. Did I touch on it, or did you have another question for me?
Just a couple of clarifications. Did the former system you were talking about, and I remember that, it was up to the council when a citizen initiated ordinance would come up, the council could adopt it or put it on the ballot. Did the former system allow the council to adopt that citizen initiative, but amend it while doing that?
No.
Or did they have to adopt it word for word?
Yeah. Yeah, you had to adopt it as is.
Okay. Are you familiar with, my clock always seems to chime while I'm talking. I apologize if you can hear that. Were they allowed to negotiate with the initiating committee to maybe make some changes before they adopted it? No. Wow. Okay.
Not at that point, but Kevin, as everybody on the call is probably aware, the same rules applied then as apply now, which is you can't amend it at that point, but later you can amend it after the 1-year blackout period with a supermajority and so on and so forth.
Right, right, at a public hearing. And then the second question I had is, where do the rules for evaluating the title that the clerk, and maybe Paul, you know this, where do those rules live? Do they live in rules and reg, or are they in the DRMC, or where are they?
There's
the fairness, no manipulation, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a glorious sentence in the charter that has the list of criteria, and I like it. It's in the charter, and it should be taken very seriously in terms of whoever's writing it. But it's got all the right buzzwords in terms of something that's fair and clear and so on and so forth. In the distant past, Kevin, there's actually been litigation of striking down initiatives that did not fully and completely describe the measure that the people were actually even voting on. You have to go back decades to find that. But it's serious stuff in terms of being the potential for legal challenge if a title doesn't meet those criteria. Now, one of the things we don't have, this is Mark Gruskin's world, is we don't have a direct access to the Supreme Court. If there's questions about title setting in terms of any number of criteria, you don't have that direct route to the Supreme Court when you're just a municipality. But most of the action challenging the quality of the wording of a ballot title in the courts has always been at the state level.
Thank you. I also want to verify or affirm what you said about the referendum process here. The one that was on the ballot here was the first one I could remember. I asked John Bennett, did you remember any? I couldn't remember any until this particular one on the group living ordinance.
Yeah.
I heard from so many of my constituents that they thought when they voted no, they were voting to repeal. And if they were to vote yes, they were voting to keep it, and vice versa. People who supported it thought they had to vote yes in affirmation of it. It's very confusing.
That's something that we're actually going to address in this process. And that was something that it was very, very unique. As a matter of fact, 2F was a very unique, it's so unique that it was, I think it's, Mr. Broadwell, I don't know, going back to before I was clerk, we kind of took a look at it, is that, when it came to us, I took our attorney's word and advice. It was very unknown that and not well understood out in the public that the public actually can refer a measure. And that's something that, we put forward is very rare, but we're actually going to address that in the presentation and clarify that, because that was a head scratcher for a lot of folks, including myself. And it is so rare. That's one of the reasons why it's on our to-do list here. It's going to be in front of you all to clarify that language. Mr. Broadwell, do you ever remember us doing a citizen referendum?
Doing what exactly?
Citizen initiated referendum?
No. That's the point I made earlier, is that not even as gray as my hair is, do I remember the last time that happened.
Yeah.
But see, Paul, one of the things that occurs to me that in Denver's unique system, the way Denver does referendum is no different from initiating a repeal. Right. Initiating a repeal has the same effect. And so even though this technically wasn't the case, the question a couple of years ago to kind of override the unlawful camping ordinance what wasn't really a repeal of that ordinance, but it was popularly understood to be something like a repeal. And so once an ordinance has already gone into effect, just initiate a repeal if you don't like it, is something that folks always have the option to do. So it's a very strange thing. And I'll save further comments on that till we're actually talking about that subject.
Could I point out before we move on, Councilwoman and Clerk López, that we worked with initiators who successfully got an item on the ballot to establish the Fair Elections Fund and the Democracy for the People measure. We successfully worked with them to rewrite their initiative, incorporating all of their concepts. Troy, you worked with us on this in room 455, and made it something that could actually be administered. Because I remember the clerk's office at the time, as the initiative demanded that the clerk do duties that it wasn't allowed to do by charter, et cetera. Like write checks and things like that, and establish deadlines that were completely unworkable. And then because they missed the ballot in 2017, they were going to go in 2018, just 4 or 5 months ahead of the municipal election. It would have upended all of the rules, and half the people already running would not have qualified any longer. So we worked with them and we rewrote it and referred it to the ballot. And in exchange, once we had that vote, they pulled theirs from the ballot. And so we have that now in effect for the 2023 cycle. So we did do that. That's what I was alluding to, David, about what could we do in the earlier process? Could we work with them, with initiators, to try to make it fit into how city does business? But this time we were able to do that with Owen Perkins and Dave Sabato.
And to that point, Kevin, there was a situation a few years ago where city officials negotiated with some marijuana petitioners before it was on the ballot, and negotiated a withdrawal with a promise to work on the issue in the following year. And so at an early stage in the process, that kind of interplay between council and proponents is always possible at that early stage.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, David. You are an excellent historian, and you and Kevin complement each other. So we're excited to hear from both of you. And we'll get started with the presentation, and we're going to start with Clerk López.
Thank you. If we can get that PowerPoint up. All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Yes. All right. So like I said, both Kendra, Councilwoman Black and I had said, this is something that, is a joint effort between the City Council and my office to really look at some of the issues and really just to modernize our ballot access. And so we put this committee together to be able to do this. I'm going to do a little run through just to kind of summarize what we want to do. So we introduced the committee members, and I think Ian Tafoya has also joined us. Thank you, Ian. Welcome. A community activist from my side of town, actually. And then we introduced Jen Ozel too. So these are your committee members. These are folks who have a lot of different expertise, either on the ground doing grassroots in organizations, or in public service, or in like the University of Denver, University of Colorado at Denver. It's always a pleasure and a treat to have David Broadwell go through that history, and to have a briefing from David Broadwell is such a treat as a councilman. It is as a clerk. So why don't we move forward to the next slide, please? Let's get to the meat of it. Here are some of the, well, actually, let me get out of the screen a little bit. I'm going to kind of discuss some of the things that we've identified for review. Now there was, a few problems that we've encountered. And before I actually go to this slide, I'm going to talk about some of those problems, and I want to, invite my our elections director, Director Dina Dawson, and to chime in wherever you feel comfortable doing, Dina. and also Troy, since we had to work through some of these as well too. There was some confusion around the surrounding citizen referendums. That was 2F, right? That was the first thing that we identified. We had 9 petitions, which was a record breaker for us. 9 petitions that were scheduled to be filed the same day, and that required verification with the same 25-day period. So if you can imagine what kind of people power that took, we literally had to bring our election judges and personnel back in. It was a heavy lift, and they did it. They worked nights, they worked weekends. And if it wasn't for that, you know, it would have been a heck of a problem for us. The Department of Finance correction to a fiscal analysis and the municipal information booklet. We don't have anybody here yet for the Department of Finance, but in the subsequent meetings that we'll be having with this committee, we are going to invite the Department of Finance, because a lot of this you're going to see is not, although it deals with one issue, it's actually has impacts downstream. It's actually multifaceted, and it touches a lot of different issues, of which, you know, some are tied to state law. So we really have to be mindful. One recommendation or one issue that we're trying to solve for may have very different impacts, you know, down the root tree, the tree roots of the elections model that we are in. Concerns about the validity and accuracy of the municipal information booklet. I could tell you as a clerk, it's very, very embarrassing. Not being able or not having the authority to be able to be the referee there and to actually, you know, have to research some of the claims that were being made or anything like that. We couldn't. The booklet really is the proponent's statement, and folks that any citizen can submit a counter statement, and it doesn't have to go through accuracy. They just have to, you know, they can't call people out, can't be full of cuss words, and, you know, it has to be limited in terms of words, but we can't edit it really. When it comes to, so essentially, I think it was characterized, and like I said, it was embarrassing to see, because, you know, this is something that we take pride in. Facebook on paper, right? So, and you know, some of those stories that came out were absolutely true. Some of these things had not been vetted. Some of the studies weren't exactly actual studies, and it was very frustrating, but it's one of the things that we want to clarify and clean up here, and consider. Concerns with ballot numbers being reused. I remember, if you tell me Initiative 100, I know what I'm talking about. Mr. Broadwell remembers what I was talking about at that time, but Initiative 100 is there's all kinds of different initiatives. There's different initiatives with the same number, and we recycle those numbers, and it gets really confusing over time. So that's a question that we're going to consider. And that was a problem that we saw. Training and compliance for petition circulators, and then a timeline for creating that fiscal analysis. I know Councilman Black, you'll talk a little bit more about that, but a lot of this has to do with timelines. So that was some of the problems that we would run into, and it does create not just, you know, questions in terms of accuracy, but also questions in terms of its impact, one, to our tax dollars, right, and to our operations and staffing, and our ability to actually be able to do that. We didn't anticipate for there to be 9 measures on that ballot. In a coordinated election, you're maybe looking at a 1-card ballot, and in Denver, how many ballot cards did we have, Director Dawson?
It was 2 front and back.
2 front and back, which means we're increasing the budget for that. And there's a lot to go through, right? And there's a lot of, you know, when you have it, turnout depends on what's on the ballot. It's a big part of it. What we don't want to do is exhaust voters as well too. So I think, you know, going through all of that, you know, it does create an impact. So that's why we want to look at these things and consider these items that we want to review. Timeline. Consider aligning the state's timeline for both citizen initiated and council referred. A lot of what we see here that we're looking at for best practices are already being done by the state. Now, it doesn't make sense for us to go out of state. It doesn't make sense to look at other cities, because our citizens are here. The people are here. They're familiar with our model. They're familiar with the state model. So kind of looking at what the best practice is, right? Considering council's review and comment period, right? Consider changes to timeline for verification of signatures. considering changing the timeline for fiscal analysis, considering creating council rule defining deadline to file to align more closely with elections timelines. This is, also touching on the council process as well too. Single subject and ballot titles. We don't have a single subject rule. And like Mr. Broadwell said, our ballot titles are not by a board, they are by the proponents. Align with single state subject requirement, which is something that's being done that is very helpful. Potentially creating a ballot title setting board to ensure clear and concise language. And also petitions, right? Considering requiring fiscal analysis to appear on a petition prior to circulation, right? Consider training and compliance for circulators. We do training and compliance that's state mandated for voter registration, right? Explore a signature requirement from each council district, potentially like what was passed with on the state level, that they wouldn't have to have a certain amount of signatures from every part of the state. So this would be a question of, a petition would have to have a requirement from each council district. Consider online petition endorsement signatures. This is something that's being done in Boulder. I could tell you right now, it is a heavy lift. It's something that's brand new. We have been in conversations with folks that have, wanted us to explore and look into that. And that's something that we will do, but it's something that we won't do as a part of this process in terms of online petition endorsement signatures. It's a heavier lift than what we have time for in the timeline that we have right now. It's not that we're not thinking of it. It's not that we're not prioritizing it. We just like to actually dive a little deeper with our staff in terms of capability and what's required and what, frankly, what Boulder's doing, right? Reviewing our signature threshold, both candidate and ballot initiatives. When I was a councilman, it only took 100 signatures, just 100 signatures in a district of 56,000, right? I don't know when the last time we updated that. Denver has grown exponentially. We're a city of over 750,000 people now, and 500,000 registered voters. And you heard Mr. Broadwell say that, the average is hovering about 5%. We're at 2%. So it's very, very, very low threshold compared to what, other sizable cities as Denver and also within the state. The other one is consider verification of random sampling of signatures. We get a lot of Donald Ducks and Jose Cuervos, and we got signatures that really they're the same handwriting, right? And so exploring that random sampling of signatures, right? Going through all of it, looking at that, being able to make sure we have a mathematical standard and a system of measurement that we can actually use for that. The ballot booklet, aligning municipal information booklet with state blue book model, right? Like I said, I don't, as the clerk and recorder, I don't like looking at our booklet and being able to see it on a newscast and it being characterized as Facebook on paper and agreeing with that. There needs to be some reform there. There needs to be a stricter look at it so that it's fair, so that people trust the information that's being sent to them. We, as the elections division, that's what we do. We don't want that trust to erode. And anything that comes out of our office, we want to make sure that that goes through that fine-tooth comb, right? And so that blue book model by the state is actually a really good looking model, and it includes an objective fiscal and operational analysis, qualitative description of economic impact, and it's very informational. Review the public comment period for municipal election books, right? We had to tell a lot of people, I'm sorry, but we don't have a public comment process. And, of course, we're going to get skewered for that, but we really don't. We'd like to. That there has to be some kind of method in which the public can chime in, but there really wasn't no tool in the box for us to be able to do that. Review and consider timeline for challenges and hearings. Some of the other things that we'd like to look at for review in this process is considering cleaning up a portion of our code in a charter which replaces citywide election with municipal general, coordinated or general election. right? So is this a fixed process? Can you only submit ballot initiatives during a municipal, a general, a coordinated, or leave it up to, any election for us to be able to do, right? And should an initiated ordinance trigger a citywide on its own where there's no candidates, a citywide municipal election, right? So these are the kind of thought processes that we want to go through and consider. We don't want to leave any leaf unturned. Every idea is something that we can discuss. And then at the end of the day, this group will help with that recommendation. We'll solicit public input to make sure that we capture that as well too. The other thing is this has to do with council, considering a council supermajority requirement to refer a charter change, and not just a simple majority. And then review and define the ballot numbering process, which we talked about. There's multiple I-100s. And so when you're talking about I-100, is it the I-100 I know or the I-100 you know? So we don't have to necessarily recycle those. Next slide, please. Here are the items that we are identifying for immediate discussion and recommendation. This is the low-hanging fruit. These are the things that we can knock out of the way, crew. And we'd like to be able to have the discussion about this and get your thoughts on this. One, single subject for ballot initiatives. The issue right now that we have is current system for citizen initiatives makes it difficult to approve the language. Multiple subjects can be confusing to voters, and the system for citizens does not require the same standards as council referral. The recommendation that we have that we want you all to consider is mirroring the state law as applicable and extend city council requirements to citizen initiatives. The second thing that we'd like to consider today, review/define citizen referendum process. This was to F, right? It was very confusing for us. It is very rare, but one, the process and the procedures for a citizen referendum on a council ordinance are not well defined, and it causes confusion. And we fielded a lot of those calls. Why is this a referendum? And our answer was, it's absolutely rare. I don't think we've ever had a citizen referendum on a council ordinance, but it is a referendum, and it is something that the citizens have the right to do. Let's parking lot that and bring that to our modernization committee. So the recommendation there would be to define that process in code, including numbering and placement into the blue book, right, and where it sits. And then third, I've talked about this ad nauseum, defining the ballot numbering process. What system do we want to use? So we don't have to have multiple Initiative 301s every single year. Issue is recycling of numbers that creates confusion for voters because they think we're rehashing 2F again, right? When 2F next time around could become something completely different. The recommendation for us is a numbering system that decreases confusion and can be easily implemented with minimal disruption to the process and ballot design. Training and compliance for petition circulators and committees. The problem right now is that our current code doesn't levy penalties on committees or candidates, only circulators. If a circulator is caught, fraudulently putting in signatures in there, we penalize the circulator, not the committee. That's not fair. If we see patterns and practices, and it is common, then we should be able to levy penalties on committees or candidates. It shouldn't just be the circulators as the patsies. This is something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that could use updates to mirror state law around hearings, fines, fees, etc. We're not trying to drag anybody into jail. We just want there to be accountability for that process. Like I said, we see a lot of Mickey Mouses, Donald Ducks, and Jose Cuervos on there. So we want to be able to do something about that. Our recommendation is to draft language to mirror state law and the Muni Code and consider trading requirements. I don't know, Dina, if there's anything you wanted to add there that I skipped or missed.
I don't think so. I think you covered most of it, but some of the concern from our constituents were that they were tricked into potentially signing a petition, and their only recourse really that we were able to provide to them was to contact the district attorney's office to file charges against the circulator, and a circulator that was found to be that it was found to be true would pay a fine of $500 and up to a year in jail. And no one took that opportunity. So it was really onerous on the citizens to be able to take action. So that's where the discussion came in to mirror state law. And let's provide some training that's actually a benefit to the committees as well as the circulators. Just a really good best practice to line that up with state law.
Okay. And the number 5 on that is the online petition endorsement. Like I said, Denver currently has only in-person petitioning. I know that's a conversation that's been taken place. We've been contacted by different individuals, organizations, groups about the potential of having in-person petitioning. I mean, the recommendation from us is that it's not something that, I mean, it's a deep dive. It is something bigger than what we're trying to accomplish here. But we do want the time and the ability for our staff and our experts in the office, our subject matter experts, to contact Boulder for data, learning, analyzing the code, rules, capacity for that, and then reporting it back to this committee, to our office, and look for other models in other states and jurisdictions to compare and learn from. We know that we're, in a modern age, and a candidate can get petition signatures on a iPad that we send out. They can do that with the initiator ordinance as well too. This would radically change how we do that. There's a lot of state law that we would have to take a look at as well too. So it's a lot deeper dive than what we have prepared for this committee. But know that we put this on here because it's something I want to address right out the gate and be honest and transparent is where we're at. The other thing too is, if you haven't noticed the environment that we are in, even when you tell somebody that our ballots are on a paper ballot, they still don't believe you. So imagine doing that digitally. Next slide. Councilman Flynn, I think you have your hand up. I don't want to keep going forward. And Councilwoman Black, let me know if chime in, or I know we're co-chairing this, so I don't want to dominate the conversation here.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to throw a few things on one thing on the table, actually, on the low-hanging fruit, on the issue of referendum and how confusing that is, since we discussed it a little earlier. Perhaps I'd just like to suggest we talk about changing the choice on the ballot from yes or no to repeal or retain this ordinance. Might make it a lot clearer. So just for purposes of discussion, I'd like to throw that out.
Is there an example that you want to throw out there? Recent?
Me?
Yeah. Is there anything?
Just while with the group living repeal, that was the referendum. It might have been a lot clearer to people if the choice wasn't just yes or no. If I vote yes, am I keeping it or getting rid of it? I don't know. If you put repeal this law, this ordinance, or retain this ordinance instead of yes or no.
So we will definitely consider that. So why don't we circle back, and I appreciate that, Councilman Flynn, that's something that we should definitely look at. Then why don't we go back to discussion on 1 through 5, since those are the low-hanging fruit.
So why don't we start with the item Kevin just mentioned, which is number 2, since Kevin, your hand is still up. Did you have more you wanted to say about that? I think that's a very good idea. I know David Rodwell had some thoughts about that too. David, did you want to comment on that one?
Well, I kind of assumed that a lot of these would be going into more detail on a future agenda. So I'm kind of like, what's the pleasure of the group? But Kevin took the discussion just now kind of in a very surgical, specific, low-hanging fruit direction. And the broader point I was making a moment ago is that you could just amend the charter and go to a more conventional referendum process, which is when a new ordinance is adopted, unless the two things can happen. It can either be subject to referendum or not. If you attach a safety clause declaring a matter of immediate importance in terms of health and safety, there is no referendum possibility on the ordinance. And the legislature at the state level selectively these days does that. Some bills have safety clauses, some bills don't. The ones that have safety clauses aren't subject to referendum. But if they don't, they go into effect in 90 days. But before they go into effect, if people get their act together and submit petitions, they can keep it from going into effect before an election can be held. Just as a reminder to everybody, this happened in the last couple of years on the national popular vote compact with the other states to kind of go around the Electoral College and agree with other states just to elect the president on the basis of popular vote. That was proposed by the legislature. Some people didn't like it, and they forced it onto the ballot via a conventional referendum petition. Again, I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, but there is a way to just kind of completely retool it to be a normal referendum process, just like the state and every other municipality has. But it would require a significant rewrite of the charter to do that. But there may be some advantages to that. The other thing, again, I don't want to get too far back in history. I just want to leave it there. There's some little surgical things you can do, like Kevin talked about, if that's the sense of the group, but there's also a more fundamental structural thing that would bring it more into alignment with, dare I say, a best practice or a normal practice around Colorado in terms of how referendum normally works. And obviously, if you're voting to endorse an ordinance or approve an ordinance, yes means yes and no means no. See, that's if it's structured as a normal referendum question, you don't have that kind of ambiguity.
All right, thank you. We've got some more hands up. And just to clarify, our thought for today was that these 5 items are items that we thought we might be able to resolve today and to come to some consensus on. So we have an hour left, so we thought we'd dig in on some of them and see where we get. So thank you very much. And next up is Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Councilwoman Black. I'm supportive of each of these 5 issues and discussing the changes that we can make through here. A little bit curious which ones we can, how is this going to work, right? So some of these items potentially are addressed in the charter and would require a vote of the people via charter change. Some of them are in ordinance and would be, you know, under the purview of city council. So we could do that via city council. Some of them are state laws. Or I guess we want to mirror state law. So just a little bit of help, I guess, or clarification around the goals for each in terms of, you know, if we come to a solution, how it would be changed, I think would be really helpful, because I feel like most of these are under city council's purview under ordinance, but I would love a little clarification on that. Thank you.
So it depends, right? And I think it depends on how we want to change each one and identify the routes to the solutions, right? Some of them, if they are, you know, if we want to strengthen them and it does, you know, and we want to make them more permanent in the charter, then it would be a charter recommendation, right? Others, ordinance, you want to keep nimble. And then others you can leave to rulemaking as well. So that we can even be more nimble with that as well too. So some of these things actually are inherently charter, but it just depends. I don't know if Troy or David, do you want to chime in on that, Vicky?
Yeah, and if I could just jump in really quickly to clarify my question. Thank you, Clerk López. I guess I'm wondering where they live now. Right, so we've got 2 kind of separate issues happening here. Number one, where do they live now? And do any of them say, for example, need a charter change in order to remove them from the charter and replace that language with something else, if that's what we decide to do? So where are they now? And then, you know, yes, how we change them, I guess, would depend on what we decide to change.
Mr. Bratton, do you want to crack at that? It's a mix. Essentially, it's a mix of Muni Code, charter rules, state statute.
That's right. I think it's a mix. You know, for like taking single subject, for example, we don't have that requirement now for initiatives. You know, I think I would recommend it goes in the charter. The state has it in the Constitution. The requirement that council ordinances have a single subject is in the charter. So, you know, might probably be the best place for that. Taking the second one as an example, part of the problem we had with the citizen referendum was that the right for citizens to refer an ordinance adopted by council exists in the charter. But you know, as David and others were saying, we hadn't had one before. So not until we had one did we really realize, you know, there's no other mention of it in the code, in the rules. So we struggled with how to number it, how to do it for the blue book. So that one, depending on what we do, if we leave the right as it is, and, you know, David was explaining our ordinances take effect, and then there's a 30-day period during which people can refer them. If we want to leave it like that, then we could leave the charter alone and we could add some more clarifying language by ordinance potentially into the code. But if we're looking at fundamentally changing how we do that, then, you know, that's a charter change. The ballot numbering process, we follow Secretary of State rule on that one. Arguably, that's something we could do without doing any changes to our rule at all, unless we're looking at a more fundamental renumbering system, in which case it should be in code. So that's just kind of a few examples. And as we dig into the individual ones, you know, I'm happy, or David or Vicky or Dina can, you know, explain where they are now. If they do it, yeah, I mean, frankly, some of this stuff we just don't even have. So we'd be looking at grabbing it from the state. Some of it's in the state constitution, some of it's in Title I for charter measures, some of it's in Title 31. So it's just be kind of grabbing it piecemeal. And ideally, I think having kind of a one-stop shop in our code.
What about 4 and 5? What are your thoughts on that one? Oh, if you want to.
Yeah, can we switch the slide?
Please. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't have the training right now for petition circulator. So that would be looking at grabbing something from Article 1 in the state law and Title 30, or Title 1 in the state law, Title 31 in the state law, and putting that into our code. Online petition endorsement, I think would be not even just clerk and recorder rule, which is kind of where our iPad petition program lives now.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So then I just wanted to kind of flag, since we switched slides and we're looking at 4 and 5 now, in terms of question 4, do I agree that we should do some sort of training and compliance for petition circulators? Yes. Question about, budget and responsibilities. Who's, if yes is a very easy answer, but if there's no, but we, I think, need to have some specifics around that. So we ensure, is that do we need employees for that? Do we need to expand headcount? Do we need training, facilities, and what costs would that incur? Do we need, is it something that could potentially be done online with, some sort of tech services fix? And if so, what sort of costs would that incur? Yes, I think 4 is a great idea and I'm 100% on board for it. But in the real world, when we're looking at how to do this, I think just flagging that we also need to kind of talk through that then there would be budget implications to that we also need to consider. Thank you. I'm done with my questions now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer. Our next question is from Karen Goldman.
Thank you. I am currently working with 3 municipalities on referendum elections. And so I'd like to go back to Councilmember Flynn's comment about the language on the ballot and then tag on to what David Broadwell has said. There was a suggestion that instead of having yes or no, we say repeal or retain. And as David indicated, that Denver seems to have a situation where in a referendum situation, the ordinance goes into effect, and then following the effective date, the citizens can petition to put it on the ballot. Well, if you look at municipal election code, it's done a little differently. The idea is that you got 30 days from the date of adoption before something goes into effect. And if in that time frame, a petition is filed and enough signatures are determined to be sufficient, then the ordinance is suspended from going into effect. And then the governing body has two things that they do. The first thing is they reconsider the ordinance. So they either re-adopt it or they repeal it. If they don't repeal it, then it goes to the voters. And the question on the ballot is, shall ordinance blah, blah, blah be adopted? Then it's yes means yes and no means no. So I just only wanted to offer that as an indication of the way other municipalities currently handle referendum situations.
Thank you. And so Kevin's suggestion is pretty simple. Do you, Karen, with all your experience, feel that the description you gave for other cities is a direction we should go in, or should we go for something more simple? This is not your official vote. It's just for conversation purposes.
Certainly, to me, it seems that if the citizens are committed enough, or if the committee is committed enough to get the signatures on the petition, it does make sense that once the citizens say, hey, we want an opportunity to vote on this, which is what the petition does. It gives them this, what they're saying by turning in the signatures on the petition is saying, we want to say in what's going on. Then I think it's reasonable to suspend the ordinance from going into effect and then moving ahead with the process. It still gives the governing body an opportunity to weigh in once again, if they want to, but then if they decide that they feel that they personally do not want to repeal the ordinance, which really is their only option, then they send it to the voters. So to me, everybody seems to understand how it works, and that's the way it's done.
And are the signature requirements the same as they would be for the Denver method?
I would have to go back to the number of signatures. I think David was right, is that it generally is around 5%, I think, of the registered electors in the last election, regular election. But I would have to verify that. There's not from my understanding, there's not a wide range of percentages that are used in the referendum process.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Anything else before we go to our next person?
No, thank you for the opportunity to make that comment.
All right, next up is Ian Tafoya.
Thank you, Councilwoman Black. I have first a process question. So if you're voting here for a recommendation, that's to like advance more investigation into it, or you're saying like this is a recommendation you would send forward to council? I want to understand that, because I the way I feel about voting, I would want to go back and have conversations with people. Perhaps there are people who are attending and watching here who have opinions, and I want to be clear on what the voting moving forward on a recommendation now means.
So what we're looking at, that's a great question, Mr. Tafoya. What we're looking at is, these are some of the low-hanging fruit that are not going to require that much of a heavy lift in terms of analysis and things that we can have our folks, draft language on and get ready, either for considering, in front of council, either through charter or ordinance or through rulemaking through my office. So, for example, the training, and what we're seeing in some of the chatter is that the training and compliance for circulators and committees for petitions, we ask that for, and we do that for voter registration. right? And in the Secretary of State's office, actually, it's a requirement if you're going to be a voter registration drive to be able to do that training so that the people that are doing it can, receive that training, know what to do, know what not to do. Common mistakes on petitions, for example, separating the pages, right? Reassembling them, things like that, that part of what we want to do is if you're going to do a petition, you're going to do these, you're going to circulate them. We'd like to train you on very common mistakes, do's and do nots, things like that. So, it really does pain us to sometimes see full petitions come back and then be disqualified because they're crossing things out, they're separating pages and stuff like that. It's better to have training on the front end. So this would be required training.
Sure, I understand that that's what the recommendation is making, but I still don't think you answered my process question. Is if we're asking to move forward on it, you would go work towards that language and then we would review it again?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're just deciding whether we want to move forward. If this is a good idea to investigate.
That's
okay.
that's what we're essentially doing. So it's not a vote cast. It's just here. We're asking you for your all
Sure.
you guys' input.
Okay.
Your go ahead to move forward to investigate and bring a more
Sure.
better
I'll just
solution.
share a couple other notes that I had here. I mean, I would agree, having run a lot of these and trained a lot of people to go out there. I mean, there are a lot of resources and people can do it. It is a shame. And it's in our best interest to train our people so that they don't have whole packets disqualified. I guess my concern would be that it's sometimes hard enough to get someone to put in 4 or 5 hours to go carry a petition. And now they have to find a way to a training facility to be able to complete that. I think that shrinks the pool of people. And as the pool is smaller, if you're increasing numbers of volunteer advocates, that changes things. But I have seen what you're talking about, which is out of state, or they appear to be out of state, or certainly out of our community petitioners who are on the street misrepresenting ballot initiatives. I've definitely seen that because we're out there at the same time as them, talking at the same time. So I saw a question in the chat and I actually wrote this one down myself. If we could see some examples of an ordinance that's passed recently that would be single subject or more than one subject in another, so that we can just kind of have an understanding of what like that looks like and how it's played out in our communities. I still have questions about, and I think it'll be played out here on what the concerns and confusion were on the referendum process, because confusion's still pretty ambiguous. It sounds like there were a couple with like the blue book numbering and it's just in the charter. So I guess I'm interested in knowing more about that part of it. In regards to the changing of the numbering, is there data out there or focus grouping that's been done on the numbering? Because there's just something to me that says the number 434 seems like a harder thing to get people to remember in their mind than a round number. And people are used to 300, or if it's 301, it's the first one this year. It's the 5th one next year. I've had 300, I think several times we've been able to reuse signs. And so I guess I'm really just curious as to like what the data is on the psychology of the numbering. And if the goal is to reduce voter people not participating, right, to increase voter participation, I would just not want to change it to a number system that would be even harder to get people encouraged to vote.
Ian, can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
Every year we have an initiative 300, and every year they seem to be a fairly juicy topic. And it's very confusing for people. Yeah. Okay. And so, there are other ways to number things. You could have, like our council bills might have, the year before 22 and then the bill number, but something to distinguish it. So every year we're not talking about initiative 300, which was, marijuana related or camping or whatever. Every year it's been something different. And so we need to change it. And I don't see how that would in any way confuse voters or make it harder for people to understand. It would actually clarify things for people.
Can I address something? Councilwoman, you are 100% correct. And Ian, that is the issue, right? A 300 one year could be gravy for some people and absolute no for others, right? And then to have those switch, voters, they remember, and they remember numbers and they remember initiatives, especially something that they're really passionate about. What, 300's up again? Vote no again. And it might be, no taxes ever for you ever again, right? So I think it could be, what we don't want to do, and what we let's just say what we want to be able to do is reduce voter confusion. We know that's an issue that's been brought up to us, and figuring out a way that we're not just recycling the same old number 300, right? Nothing against number 300.
I hear what you're saying. I having campaigned multiple 300s, I've never actually encountered confusion, and so I guess that's where, and I believe that it has for others. I've never encountered that. I have had people, of course, say like, "Oh, wasn't marijuana 300?" People really remember that one, but maybe that helps us in our yes votes, and I never really thought about that.
It could have been 420. I'm just saying it could have been 420.
Okay. Well, those are all the comments that I had that I had, and so those are just some things I'd like explored as the process moves forward.
You brought up a question that somebody from the public brought up, Kendra. I think you and I were having a side discussion on making sure that we have some of the public comments up there, and I just wanted to make sure. Kendra, do you want to look at that comment that came up, and it just to acknowledge the person that brought it up?
Sure. It's a question from my constituent, Bruce Basquette. Can someone provide an example or two of a non-single subject ballot initiative?
I think Mr. Gruskin, Mr. Broadwell, I think, you all probably remember some of these that have been out there notoriously, right?
I'd be happy to answer, Councilmember Black, if you'd like.
Please do, because I certainly do not know that answer.
So this issue doesn't really arise at the municipal level very often, because very few municipalities have a single subject requirement. I believe the city of Colorado Springs adopted one several years ago, and there are other jurisdictions. But there have been a series of state measures that have been stricken for single subject purposes. Oftentimes, what the court finds is that there are purposes that are unrelated that are going to motivate different groups of electors to either vote for or against the measure, and resulting in the fact that someone would be surprised to find out that they had approved both kinds of legal changes. For instance, as popular as the redistricting commissions were, and as big a vote margin as they passed, the original version was so complex and it changed how the Supreme Court nominating commission operated for purposes of the redistricting process, where it had never been involved. In addition, there are fiscal measures that change certain types of tax policy, but then also change certain non-tax policy issues that are, frankly, according to the court, confusing to voters or misleading to voters. There is a whole array of initiatives, and honestly, Martha and I could probably come up with a pretty easy list, but the single subject requirement is well recognized, except where municipalities haven't imposed it. And that would be an opportunity here. As long as I've got the floor so that I don't keep coming back and chiming in, let me just say that in terms of the suggestion from Councilman Flynn about the referendum proposal, the Supreme Court has routinely said that it's not the job of the title to state the effect of a measure, but really to describe it. As to a referendum, retain and repeal an ordinance, we have to remember that outside of the 20 of us, most people aren't going to be as focused on legislative process as we are. And this might be an opportunity, if you're going to make a change, to say retain the ordinance so that, and state the general objective of the ordinance, maybe coming from that ordinance's ordinance title, and repeal the ordinance so that. And I think that kind of title will be helpful. And remember, the title gets used in two different places. One, obviously, is on the ballot, But the other is the petition to get it onto the ballot. And as we have all encountered with circulators who are standing out in front of a Safeway, or even going door to door or coming to a community meeting, they tell you what is on their mind about this initiative, which may be factually and legally correct, or it may be wildly inaccurate. Not always on purpose, but nonetheless, having a ballot title that is clear and tells voters exactly what they're signing on to is important. And I think the issue that got raised in the introduction is the number of signatures that it takes to get on the ballot. And just so you know, the city of, I don't think there's a jurisdiction that's as easy to get a measure on the ballot as the city and county of Denver. And I think it's time. Denver's grown enough, and honestly, the ballot has become complex enough, and the issue discussions have become diffused enough under the current system that there really isn't as much thoughtful consideration to legislative change as there probably needs to be. And I understand that's not one of your 5 top issues, but at the end of the day, there probably isn't a more important question. And I would just say, in terms of what's up on the screen, and it probably relates to number 5, which is to what extent does it make sense to use online resources? But I would tell you the state, as to number 4, has a very sophisticated training system. Not every volunteer has to be trained, but certainly the companies that are making money in order to recruit people do have to do training, and particularly for their paid circulators. And it has introduced a level of accountability that was missing, dramatically missing, 10 years ago, before this really got put in place. And it doesn't assure that circulators are going to follow the law, but it assures that they know the law and therefore can be held accountable when they make purposeful missteps in order to generate signatures or whatever. So I apologize for droning on about 6 different issues, but now you won't have to listen to me anymore.
Okay, thank you. And let me just follow up. So 1, you said you and Martha could come up with some specific examples of violating single subject. Maybe you could share them with me and the clerk, and we could email them out to everyone. Discussing signatures is on our agenda, just not for today. Today, we were just trying to talk about some things that we thought were easier. Item 5, the online petition endorsement. The clerk wanted to put that on there just to say that he wanted to investigate it. It's not, we're not agreeing that that's low hanging fruit at all. It's just, he just wanted this group to know that he wanted to look into it.
Yeah.
Very good to know that the state does require training. And if you could also share some details about that, that we could share out, that would be terrific. And I think those are the only things I was going to follow up with you on. And next up is Gina. Hi, Gina.
Hi, Councilwoman. This is Jenna. Happy to be here. Yeah, no worries. It looks like Gina. You're totally good. So I had a couple of comments to add on this list of things. And so I definitely, around the single subject requirement, I definitely think that this is absolutely a direction that we should go. I've done a lot of statewide ballot initiative work within my career, and I can tell you that this is one of the easiest and most straightforward things that actually helps us campaign and work with voters so that we can actually have something clear and consistent. My main question would be around what that title review board would actually look like and who would appoint it. I would want to make sure that that title review board did not become a political platform for folks to kind of, use their own opinions to create the ballot initiative subjects, and that we had some type of system set up to where people were not being able to where they had to actually use expert opinion on what the initiative actually means. So that would be one question and something that I would want to look at. Definitely agree with increasing the number of signatures, but I understand that is a conversation for another day. So excited for that conversation. And as far as the ballot numbering goes, I can tell you that the amount of money that usually goes into actually branding a particular ballot initiative with the number that it's assigned to, and the quickness in which Denver tends to recycle these numbers absolutely has caused confusion with a lot of different communities. And so I definitely think that something that we should look at is just kind of bringing it up. So if say we did 300 through 307, the following year, we're looking at 308 to 312, and then the following 313 and above. And hopefully if we do our jobs right here and we actually make it a system and where it's a little bit more difficult to get random things on the ballot, we should hopefully not be recycling things so constantly that if we used 100 system, that we could recycle it back down to 3 once we reach 4, if that's what we needed to do, and just for example. So I definitely think that that's something that we should look at. And I think that that would definitely keep costs down as well in terms of how folks need to actually brand things. And the less money that we're spending, the less we're bugging people, the happier voters are, which is always great. Around the training component from the state, something that I would definitely want to make sure that we include in this investigation process is increasing that liability for the organizations or the directors who are actually training the volunteers to send them out. I have experienced over the last several years a lot of different, outside the state organizations coming in, teaching their volunteers how to do it in an incorrect way, or teaching even sometimes paid staff to do it in an incorrect way, or to represent a ballot measure in a dishonest way. And I think that there needs to be significantly higher liability on the actual organizations and the people that are running it, and rather than just simply placing it on the petition circulator themselves. That's frankly, I think, a way that we've seen a lot of outside state organizations escape liability on doing some really underhanded things. And so I would want to make sure that they are included in that process. The last thing I will mention is that, because you said we're gonna investigate looking at it online to do petition collection online, but we'll talk about that another day. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
I think that's excellent. If I may, Councilwoman Black, I think that's an excellent recommendation in terms of, moving forward with looking at probably a system of numbering of what you said. And I know just for the folks in the public, some of the chat that we're seeing is that it does make pretty decent sense. The other thing is training as well too. We started doing voter registration training for groups and individuals. We hold trainings in our office, and we're going to start doing that a little bit more. I think it would be, it's totally doable, and it's something that we would love to be able to do, only because this is about civic participation. We don't want to make it harder for folks. We don't want to create a chilling effect on the democratic process. We just want to make it fair, and we want to educate people. And the last thing we want to do is see people disqualified or have that democratic process undermined. I think, for us, it's an issue of fairness and accessibility, but also accountability too. So, and yes, we will. I want to just go back and highlight and underscore the fact that these items that we're identifying for the immediate discussion and recommendation are the low-hanging fruit. We have a whole plethora of stuff ready to go on the stove, ready for some debate, ready for, Ian, go back to your folks in the community and say, hey, this is what we're considering. What number is too high for threshold? So there's a lot of things that we definitely want folks to put more thought to. I just want to take some stuff off of this list, if that's okay, Councilwoman. Can we do that? I think we've heard some recommendations so far.
Yes, but first Martha Tierney has her hand up. So Martha, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Councilwoman Black and Clerk López. I was just going to chime in on some of these and give you my thoughts on it. I think single subject is a great idea, and I would be in favor of that. I think on the referendum process, I think that David Broadwell's idea of putting Denver in line with how everybody else does referendum across the state, including at the state level, makes a lot more sense, and I think would be less confusing for voters. I know that will be a larger charter change, but I think you would be better served by having a process that is not contrary to how the state does it and other communities. If voters are moving between communities, they will get confused. On the ballot numbering, I agree. I don't have any problem with that. You just have to come up with a ballot numbering process and make it clear. I think petition circulator training is a really good idea. I put the site in the chat for where the Secretary of State's training is. I will note, however, that even at the state level, there are no penalties that attach to the committees or the candidates. They really are only against these paid signature gathering firms. Now, there are penalties that attach in the sense that if a protest is filed and you can prove that there's been fraud in the petition gets thrown out. And so, you know, the person doesn't get on the ballot, or the measure doesn't get on the ballot. But I would want to give some pretty considerable more thought to what it would mean to penalize committees and candidates that aren't paid firms that are doing this as a business. And maybe there's a way to do that, because I agree with Jenna that there is abuse there, but we'd have to think that through pretty hard. And I am very nervous about online petition gathering. So I know that's not up for debate today, but if you think 9 is a lot, wait till you have online petition gathering. That's all I got.
We could name our mobile voting unit Voting McVoteface.
All right, thank you. Next up is Sky Stewart.
Thanks, Councilwoman. I don't know that I'll add anything hugely different from what others have said, but just in the interest of chiming in a little bit, certainly agree that the single subjects conversation makes total sense and is an important one. It is already a requirement for all of the ordinances we bring forward in charter through the council process to be single subject. So it only makes sense to have an equivalent process, I think, when we're talking about initiated ordinances that, you know, eventually will be treated like any other law passed by the city council. In terms of the referendum process, to me, it's not exactly low-hanging fruit. There's certainly components of it that could be, but it is probably a much larger conversation overall. And really interesting points brought up by different members today. So appreciate that. One of the things that, as this particular referendum from the last ballot was going forward, created challenges for us was in the way, and Troy alluded to this when he was talking about not having a lot of specificity in our code around referendums and not a lot of experience, that it got numbered the same way as if council had referred it, which was completely awkward for it to appear as if it was a council referred measure to undo something council had already voted to support. So there are certainly some corrections there that are really important, and maybe some are simpler than others. Wholesale moving into a process like other cities have, I think for me, I would want to think a little bit more about it. And David Broadwell could probably chime in here, but one of the effects that I think happened in previous processes that happened in Denver was people put safety clauses on everything so that they weren't subject to referendum. And, you know, that's got its own consequences that we probably should think about and talk about. You know, is there a standard for enacting a safety clause? Or is it that safety clauses go on everything and then you're really limiting a citizen's right to referendum? And there's, you know, there are pros and cons to all of that conversation, but it is for me a little bit of a bigger thought than a low-hanging fruit. There might be some low-hanging fruit opportunities, but that wholesale change is such a big conversation. Certainly support what others have said about the ballot numbering process. It is confusing. It's confusing. We're talking a lot about the initiative numbers, but it's confusing for the administration on the things that are referred by council too. We have a 2C every year or every couple of years. And for some subset of people, 2C is a funding mechanism for you know, the National Western Campus. For some people, 2C is a bond measure. So I agree, just, even from an internal city facing perspective, it's very confusing to have those same numbers used over and over again. Support the idea of training of circulators. I think we have all encountered people who are, whether willfully or not, passing on incorrect information to people as they seek their signatures. So it's certainly supportive of that. And then would agree with some of the other comments that have been made. The online petition process does make me nervous as well too. I'm glad to see it's just a data gathering and trying to learn more about it. That also does not feel like low-hanging fruit to me in terms of being a big conversation that probably has a lot of pros and cons. So that's my perspective on those 5 issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. Just let me say one thing, Clerk Lopez. The referendum issue clearly is very complex, and as I said in my initial comments at the very beginning of the meeting, I said it isn't necessarily this committee's job to figure out how we fix something. If this committee can decide how to fix something, that's great, because what we'll do is we'll make the recommendations to the full council. But it will be the council for something like that who would decide what to do. So if this group can come up with a recommendation, that's great. But if the group just wanted to say we need to address it, it could be something that we punt to the council. But it sounds like it's a top topic for everyone. And with that, I will turn it over to the clerk.
Thank you. And that's absolutely right. A lot of things are going to go in front of the council, either for a vote in terms of ordinance change or to be placed on the ballot, right? Who would have thought, right? We're going to actually add more ballot items as a result of this, but it's definitely worth it. And I think, one of the things, and then the other things are rules, right? Yes, we don't expect the body here to make the sausage. That's something that the charter has tasked my office with and council with in terms of, the legislative branch and going through the legislative process. We do have, our subject matter experts here in this room, and you're looking at just a plethora of experience here in this city. And I think we're going to be able to move forward as such. So what we'll do is we'll continue to have the conversation, come up with the language and the solution and report back. But also these things that can be moved forward to, like the training, that's something that our office can do. Looking at some of the other questions out there in the language is something that we can also take a look at as well too, together, and then move forward or not. So I think, I don't know if there's any other comments or questions on these. I want to run through them. If we can start with the top, so we can summarize this and then move through. So we can go back to the single subject, heard loud and clear. We're going to go look at language. I think it is definitely prudent for us to be able to take a look at that. And if it's already required of our ordinances and it's common practice in the state, I think that's something that we're going to go forward and actually, well, I hate to sound redundant, something that we're going to move forward. Define that citizen referendum process. That is going to be a little bit more intense and sausage making. We just wanted feedback from this group and the public as to moving forward so that we can actually look at doing that, right? And Sky, I think you're spot on with that as well. I really want to make sure that that we can clarify that, because it was very hard for us, and it was a head scratcher for us. And having Vicky Ortega, who has worked in the city for 40 years and represented, been this as assistant city attorney assigned to the elections process, and watched it kind of ebb and flow, be able to give that kind of analysis with Troy Bratton and just the folks at the table. It was a head scratcher for us, but it was something that definitely ended up on a parking lot right there in our office as to what to address and to clarify in the future. And here we are doing it. The numbering process, I couldn't agree more. Jenna, I think your recommendation is brilliant. We're going to come back with a model in which we can operate from. If we can move to the next one, training and compliance, that's what we do. So that's something. Dina, do you want to speak to a little bit about that in terms of, you know, before Dina was the director of elections, Dina oversaw our voter services side, which deals with a lot of the verification and petition processes. And a lot of the reason why you saw it come in and you saw those 9 initiatives come in and they were done on time and they were led by a great leader, that leader was Dina.
Thank you, boss. Thanks, boss, and a team of amazing volunteers and election judges that helped us get through that. But I do believe, and maybe it's new, and for the group, I'm back from Colorado after 5 years in Nevada, so I'm still slightly solving with Nevada election law, but I do believe that Title I, Article 40 does have something that we could mimic here, where it's the petition committees that would be responsible for the training. And there are some repercussions there that we could take. We could create a process where the petition committees have to be in good standing. And if we end up with a ton of circulators from their committee that are being fraudulent or mistruthful, then we would be able to hold them accountable. So I do think that there is some opportunity, and that's what we'll gladly do as staff, take this back and look at it. Thank you for providing the link in the chat for the online petition process. And we would look to mimic something exactly like that. But as the group that received the petitions, keeping in mind, we're going to get into the number of signatures later, but each petition that were filed all on around the same day, the number of signatures needed was 9,084. Most folks turned in 18,000 signatures because they got double to make sure that they made it. And some of them barely made it because the petition sections were a mess, or as the clerk mentioned, we'd have to throw out entire sections. So we're really looking at creating best practices and making sure that that training is there, and that we can hold the committees accountable. It's going to be a win-win for all of us. Thank you, clerk.
No, thank you. If we want to, so we'll move forward with that committee, and we'll send you our language. For folks in the public, know that you could always contact us. We're going to have these meetings. They're going to be public meetings. We'll let you know. We'll have public notice. The Denver Clerk and Recorder.org. We're going to actually move to make sure that this is also on the council website as well, so that folks who want to participate, want to watch and be part of this discussion can. Mr. Broadwell, you have your hand up?
Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt, but a question about the training issue. Can someone from the clerk's office give us a quick update on how's it going with the iPad electronic collection? Because to the point that Dina just made, I always understood that that wonderful innovation in Denver was designed to avoid mass bad signatures, to help circulators understand by having a direct link whether or not the people signing are qualified. So of all this flood of petitions that have been happening recently, what percentage of them are using the iPads, and do we find that it works, the system works?
Dina Dawson?
I can say that in the last petition cycle, 0% used our e-sign. And what we've determined is that because the iPads have to be connected to the internet, that's a bottleneck there for a lot of the committees that needed to use them. And so we're working through developing upgrades to that system so that we can have some additional, maybe folks can use their iPhone where they can use their wireless and things of that nature. But we found we had 0 of our committees use the e-sign iPads during the last cycle. So all of the petitions that were filed on paper petition sections.
Ian, you got some input.
Well, we originally took those out on a couple of campaigns that I worked on. And eventually, you decide it's not worth it for the conversion rate for the amount of time that you have people out there. I would 100% agree. One of the bottlenecks is the service on your phone. And if you're lucky enough to have a campaign phone or you can afford that, it's even more expensive to put the hotspot on and it eats your battery. And so pretty soon you're facing a lot of those same issues that come along with tech that the analog systems simply don't have any problem with. I would also say carrying 2 or 3 of those and being able to sterilize them in between was a much more challenging than the process we had, at least during COVID, of the pens and some of that other, you're encountering more than one group at a time. And sometimes you have 2 iPads and you're taking on the liability of the cost of those as well. And so, the concerns about making sure that those come back, I think are a thought that has crossed our campaigns. But I've thought for a long time, a good interim step would absolutely be to make those connected as an iPad to the network to assist.
I have a quick question. There's some folks who are elected and are candidates at some point. For the candidate petitions on iPad, I'm looking at Councilwoman Black, Councilman Flynn, Councilwoman Sawyer. I know myself, I didn't use the iPad. When you're collecting signatures, did you guys do that? I know one of you did.
I did. It was very easy, but I was at someone's house and a bunch of people came over and signed it. So
And we only needed 100.
only needed 100 and I have 100 friends. So it worked out perfectly.
And I didn't when I was running, mostly because I was concerned that, if I was going to be asking volunteers to take that, I didn't have kind of the training or the bandwidth to explain to them how it worked and exactly what they needed to do, and then ensure with the paper petitions, I was looking at the person, I was having a conversation with them, I was seeing them sign, I was ensuring that they signed properly. And what that allowed me to do was turn in significantly less signatures, but know that the quality of those signatures was higher, so that I didn't have to gather as many in order to ensure that I got on the ballot.
Yeah.
I started to use them in 2015 and found that it was very bulky. And I don't know, maybe it works better now, but it was difficult for people to sign it and have that verified. I had, I don't want to give away names, but it's someone we would all know. She was a chair of House District 1 Democrats for a while, signing my petition. She signs her name and it got rejected. Did it again, got rejected. And so I just found it to be cumbersome. The disadvantage was going back to paper was that I had to get it in and verified quickly, because if one of the other candidates out there using an iPad, and I think John Kidd used iPads, if the same person went ahead and signed his a couple days after mine, but it got instantly verified by your system, it would disqualify his name from my petition, even though he signed mine first. So there's a problem with the dual system there.
Mr. Bradwell, you had your hand up.
Well, I'll just follow up by saying this is very revealing. I remember the hopeful days of when that innovation was adopted. And I think we need to hold the thought, if we're going to talk about numbers of signatures required particularly on initiative petitions, and sad to say, you need to get double that amount to know that you have potentially qualified your measure for the ballot. It's just a sad commentary that many invalid signatures in that proportion. I know the professionals who work in this area, they say that all the time, but we need to bear that in mind when we have the conversation later about the signature requirement.
And that's an excellent point, Mr. Broadwell, because that it speaks to who's on this committee, right? We want to get that, we want to have our ears low to the ground and be able to understand this from a multifaceted perspective, because of the fact, I mean, you see Director Dawson, who used to be our voter services manager, it was terrible seeing, and it reeked of lack of training, it reeked of lack of oversight. Ian, you had input on, some other, it's different when some folks are volunteering versus folks that are paid, right? There's a difference there in the quality that's collected, and there's really no tools that we have to police that, to hold it accountable, or to do training on the front end. So, doing that, I think, will increase the quality, increase the education in the community, and have a better, more involved, electorate in terms of doing that, right? So we want to make sure that we're improving these processes and improving that access. We are now at the 4:22 mark. Can we move to the next slide? Councilwoman Black, I want to make sure that and there's no other hands up, anything like that. So for the discussion, we do want to review and discuss ballot title board options. What does that look like? Review and discuss changes to municipal information booklet. So we don't have to be characterized as Facebook on paper, because that sucks. And then also our next meeting. Our next meeting will be February 17th. So with that, I'm going to give folks, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add or anything. I don't see, are there any other comments or anything, folks? Team Cassie, Alton, Amelia from anything coming in? I don't think so. Kendra?
Yes, I do have some closing remarks, but I see both Councilwoman Sawyer and Ian Tafoya have their hands up. So Councilwoman Sawyer next.
Thanks, Councilwoman Black. Just wanted to flag, as we discuss the municipal information booklet, whether or not that will include the requirement for fiscal impact study. I know that is a challenge all the way around, not only in terms of timing, but in terms of staffing and information. And so as we get into that discussion, I wasn't sure whether that was going to be on the table as part of that, but I do think it's incredibly important for us to discuss as long as we're having that conversation. Thank you.
That is a big topic of conversation, because I feel like that statement, I'd love to have it on the petition. People should know what the fiscal impact statement is. And Sky works very closely with our Department of Finance, and she knows how hard it is for them to pull that together. So Ian?
Yeah, my question just has to do with outreach for the next meeting, and what I can do to help with it, what the plan is. And one idea that I've been thinking through my head is every single one of those ballots that's been filed over the last decade has at least 5 people who've written their name and their number and their email address down. And I think that they would have a vested interest in at least following along with the other public participants. And then I'm also curious, will there ever be public comment going forward to allow the people who've been listening to voice their concerns or maybe great ideas that they have?
I think that's great, Ian, if and Councilwoman Black. So we definitely are pushing for public comment. We have this posted on our website. We have Alton Dillard, who just popped up from out of the name into the man. One of the things that I did as clerk in taking this office and moving forward is create an engagement team, an engagement strategy of the office, so that we are involving folks in the public. So they do have a plan moving forward to support this and making sure that folks are aware of this, but also engaging folks in that process. I think that's a good idea to really look at some of those past folks, right? Some of them are repeat offenders, right here. And we do want folks as part of the process to be able to do that. Alton, do you want to speak a little bit more to our engagement and communications efforts regarding the BAM committee, the BAM committee?
BAM. Yeah, one of the things, Ian, you make a couple of really good points. And to your point, because the people who run petitions do have to provide contact information, it'd be really easy just to go back and, invite the last 5-6 years worth of people just to make sure they know this is going on. We've also put it out via social media. And then this meeting is also being recorded. So just like the Charter Review Committee, they will reside on our website so people can double back and see the discussion.
All right. I just wanted to end with next steps. And so I think our team will provide notes from today, and we will get together to do some research on best practices around the numbering and the training. So thank you for sharing what the state does. If any of you have other resources you want to share with us, we'll also put together in a follow-up email some ideas around a ballot title setting board and ballot booklet ideas. And then we'll get some examples of violations of single subject ballot measures. And we'll send that out to you for you to think about in the next few weeks. And then we can talk further at the next meeting. And I know the timeline is something that every single thing we talk about, somehow the timeline impacts every topic. So we'll also be bringing forward in one of the next meetings more information about how we might change the timelines to give more time for the clerk to check signatures, more time for fiscal analysis and operational analysis. So be thinking about those things too. And thank you all very much. I know it's a long meeting, but we're not having very many, so we have to do a lot in these few short months. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.